Welcome to Strange Serenity, the podcast where we explore the profound, the philosophical, and the fictional. I'm your host, and today we're taking a deep dive into Frank Herbert's Dune to understand why Paul Atreides follows what he calls a terrible purpose. It's a story that's captivated readers for decades, but we're going beyond the surface to unpack the deeper meaning behind his choices.
What's fascinating about Paul is that he's not just a hero or a villain. He's a reflection of humanity's struggle with destiny, ambition, and the consequences of our actions.
Right, he's this complex figure who straddles the line between savior and tyrant. But before we get into all that, let's set the stage for those who might not be as familiar with Dune.
Paul Atreides is born into a noble family, House Atreides on the planet Caladan. He receives training in politics, strategy, and combat, all preparing him for leadership. However, there's another layer to his upbringing. His mother, Lady Jessica, is a member of the Bene Gesserit, a secretive sisterhood with their own agenda.
The Bene Gesserit are almost like a secret society, right?
Yeah.
Manipulating events from the shadows.
Exactly. They possess unique abilities and have been working for generations on a breeding program. To create the Kwisatz Haderach, a superhuman with prescience, the ability to see the future.
So how does Paul fit into their grand plan?
That's where things get really interesting. Jessica was instructed to bear a daughter furthering the breeding program. Instead, she defied orders and gave birth to Paul, a wild card that throws their meticulously crafted plans into chaos.
So Paul's very existence is already disrupting destiny. What happens next?
Well, House Atreides is betrayed and forced to flee to Arrakis, a harsh desert planet known for its spice melange, a substance with incredible properties. And it's on Arrakis that Paul's latent powers are truly awakened thanks to the spice.
The spice is key to unlocking his prescience. But how does that lead him down this path of terrible purpose?
His visions aren't a simple glimpse into the future. He sees countless potential futures, each with its own set of terrifying consequences. Imagine the burden of knowing what might come to pass and the struggle to choose the least destructive path.
It's a heavy burden to bear. What are some of the visions that haunt him?
The most significant and the root of his terrible purpose is a vision of a galaxy-wide jihad waged in his name. Millions would perish, planets would be reshaped, a horrific future that he desperately wants to avoid.
So he's not driven by a lust for power or a desire for conquest. He's actually trying to prevent a catastrophe.
Precisely. But here's the tragic irony. Every action he takes to avert this jihad seems to bring it closer. It's a classic struggle between free will and predestination. The more he fights, the more he seems to fulfill the very prophecy he's trying to escape.
It makes you wonder if knowing the future is a blessing or a curse.
That's a question Herbert explores throughout Dune. He challenges us to consider the implications of such power, the psychological toll it takes, and the fine line between trying to do good and becoming a force of disruption.
And as Paul's powers grow, he becomes a leader to the Fremen, the native people of Arrakis. They see him as a messiah fueled by the spice and their faith in his abilities.
And this is where Herbert's critique of power and leadership becomes really sharp. On one hand, Paul liberates the Fremen from oppression, but on the other, he becomes the very tyrant he sought to overthrow. The spice, the Fremen's faith, it all becomes a potent mix that elevates him to a position of immense power. And, as we know, power can corrupt even the most well-intentioned.
So is Paul the villain of Dune?
It's not that simple. Herbert doesn't paint him as a mustache-twirling bad guy. He's acutely aware of the destruction he's causing, which makes his choices even more agonizing. His internal struggle, his awareness of the blood on his hands, it's what makes him such a tragic figure.
So we have a leader with extraordinary abilities, driven by the desire to prevent a galaxy-wide catastrophe, yet seemingly doomed to become the architect of that very destruction. Where do we go from here?
Well, to understand the true depth of Paul's terrible purpose, we need to look at the personal cost of his prescience, the relationships fractured, and the unintended consequences that ripple throughout the universe.
That's a great point. Before we jump into the next part of our deep dive into Paul Atreides, a quick note for our viewers on YouTube. If you're enjoying this exploration of destiny, power, and spice, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. We'll be right back.
You know, Paul's prescience doesn't just impact galactic events. It deeply affects his personal relationships. It's as though he's playing this cosmic chess game where every move has devastating consequences, even for those closest to him.
That's a chilling way to put it. Let's delve into that. His bond with his mother, Lady Jessica, for instance. She's Bene Gesserit, trained in manipulation and control. Yet with Paul, it seems the roles are reversed.
Their dynamic is fascinating. Initially, she guides him, imparting Bene Gesserit wisdom, but his prescience rapidly surpasses hers. He perceives things beyond her grasp, making decisions she can't fully comprehend.
So it's not just a power shift. There's a growing chasm between them.
Precisely. It's a poignant element of their relationship. She's both proud and terrified of his burgeoning power, watching as he becomes increasingly isolated by the weight of his visions.
That sense of helplessness, of losing her son to forces beyond her control, it's heart-wrenching. But what about Chani? She's a Freyan woman, fiercely loyal, deeply in love with Paul. Can love withstand the pressures of prescience?
Chani represents a vital aspect of Paul's humanity. She grounds him, connects him to the present moment, to love and warmth. Yet even she becomes part of the grand design he sees, a piece on the cosmic chessboard.
Knowing the future, especially when it involves those you love, doesn't that taint the present? How can you truly experience joy or love knowing the potential heartbreak ahead?
That's the paradox of prescience, isn't it? It raises profound questions about free will versus predestination. If you foresee the outcome, are your choices truly your own? Does foreknowledge diminish the present moment?
Such weighty questions. Herbert doesn't shy away from exploring these complex themes. And then there's Alia, Paul's younger sister. Her situation is unique, almost disturbing. She's pre-born, meaning she was exposed to the spice in the womb.
Ali's fate is intertwined with Paul's, but in a much darker, more tragic way. She's born with the memories and consciousness of past Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers, essentially an adult mind trapped in a child's body.
For those unfamiliar with Dune, Reverend Mothers are the leaders of the Bene Gesserit, each possessing the combined memories and experiences of their predecessors. It's a lot to take in, even for those familiar with the story.
Imagine the implications. Alia is thrust into this world with a depth of knowledge and awareness that most never attain, let alone at such a young age. It highlights the potent and unpredictable effects of the spice, serving as a cautionary tale within the larger cautionary tale of Paul's terrible purpose.
It's like a ripple effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Paul's prescience doesn't just impact him, it touches everyone around him,
Yeah.
often with devastating consequences.
Exactly. And these personal tragedies underscore a larger point Herbert makes. The pursuit of power, even with noble intentions, can leave a trail of destruction in its wake.
And Dune isn't just a character study, it's a sweeping epic with political intrigue, religious fervor, and ecological disaster.
The world building is masterful. Herbert doesn't just tell a story. He creates a living, breathing universe with intricate systems and consequences. He weaves together ecological themes with political and social structures in a way that feels eerily prescient even decades later.
He was writing in the 1960s, yet the themes he explores, environmentalism, the dangers of unchecked power, the allure and peril of charismatic leaders, they resonate even more strongly today.
That's the hallmark of great science fiction. It uses fantastical elements to hold up a mirror to our own reality, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths and ask ourselves, what if?
So as we delve deeper into Paul's terrible purpose, it becomes clear that Dune isn't just a story about one man and his destiny. It's a reflection of humanity's complicated relationship with power, technology, and the environment. And it asks us to consider the choices we make and the unintended consequences that ripple outward, impacting not just ourselves, but everyone around us.
It's like Herbert is saying, look at the mess we humans make, even with the best of intentions.
And the messed up part is Paul's story isn't unique. History is full of leaders who started with noble goals, but things went sideways. It makes you wonder about the very nature of power.
Exactly. And in Paul's case, it's almost like the power of prescience itself corrupts. It's not just political power, it's the weight of knowing too much, seeing too far ahead. It isolates him even from those he loves.
Which brings us back to this idea of personal cost. Paul might win in some sense, but what does he lose along the way? What price does he pay for becoming Mordadib, the messianic figure leading the Fremen?
He loses everything. His family, his sense of self, his freedom to choose a different path. He becomes trapped by his own visions, and that's what makes him such a tragic figure. He's not evil, not in the traditional sense, but he's forced to make impossible choices, and no matter what he does, there's going to be suffering.
It's a stark reminder that good and evil aren't always black and white. Sometimes the hardest choices, the ones with the biggest consequences, fall into that gray area. And that's where Herbert's genius shines through. He doesn't give us easy answers. He challenges us to think critically about the complexities of leadership, power, and destiny.
And he reminds us that even with good intentions, there's always a price to pay.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Paul Atreides and his terrible purpose, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
If I had to boil it down to one thing, it's this. Don't take simple answers for granted. Paul's story reminds us that the world is complex, choices have consequences, and even heroes can make terrible mistakes.
It's a call to be more thoughtful, to question our assumptions, and to recognize that even the most well-intentioned actions can have unforeseen outcomes. But just maybe to consider how our own choices on a smaller scale might be shaping the future in ways we can't fully grasp.
And to remember that Dune is just the start. Herbert's universe is vast, full of intriguing characters and ideas waiting to be explored.
Exactly. So if you're looking for a thought-provoking, mind-bending journey, I highly recommend you venture into the world of Dune. You might just find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about power, destiny, and the human condition. And if you're craving more deep dives into fascinating topics, be sure to subscribe to Strange Serenity on YouTube. Hit that like button and let us know what other enigmas you'd like us to unravel. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that strange serenity alive.